Hey, Tim, welcome to the Strong Trust Stand podcast, man. I do appreciate you coming on tonight. I know that we tried this last week, things got in the way and we had to kind of roll it over here, but here we are. So I do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, glad to be here. Looking forward to
Perfect.
talking to you.
Yeah. Well, hey man. So what I like to do with the podcast as I started off, I'll just give you an introduction, kind of like a bio of what you've done throughout your career, throughout your life, and then from there I'll ask a couple just kind of off the cuff questions, and then we can roll right into everything.
Sounds good.
Okay, brother. All right. So it's Timothy Picard Forsythe, call sign Picard, but you go by Pick. So it says that you enlisted in the Air Force in 1983 as a Titan II electronics technician. 3 years later, commissioned, and then started flying. And your first aircraft was a T-37. First assignment was an instructor pilot. From there, you went to the T-38 as an instructor, and finally on to the F-16. Some overall kind of big numbers for you. Command pilot with 3,640 military flying hours, which is outstanding. This one I'm going to have to take a big breath for. So the list of airplanes that you've flown, and here we go. So you have the AT-38, the C-5A, the C-12F, the C-21A, C-23A, the CL-60, F-15B, the F-16B, C, and D, the F-18A, the HC-130P, KC-10A, the T-37B, the NA-37B, OA-37, the P-03A, the SGS-233A, the T-1A, the T-06A, the T-33A, T-38A and B, and the T-43A. It's a lot, man. So you retired from the Air Force after 29 years as an O-6. So thanks for that. Thanks for that service. Tons of time. Once you left there, you went to work for Pratt & Whitney Military Engines, which while you were there, you're the director of customer requirements. You're on the customer integration team lead, lead integrator of combat air forces. Since then, you have retired from that and now are on the board of directors for RCG, which is the Ricard Directors Group.
Consulting group.
Consulting group. Okay, perfect. Did I leave anything out?
Oh, there's some fill-ins there, but I'm sure we'll get to them.
Yeah. Man, that is a ton of airplanes that you have flown.
There's a story there, so
Yeah.
maybe we'll get to it if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, some quick question. Out of all of those, and maybe some that I didn't even name, what was your favorite platform to fly?
I would say depends on what it is you're trying to do. But there's absolutely no doubt, the one that I enjoyed the most in the end is the F-16. It's the one I have the most time in, and I just really enjoyed the challenges that platform presented and the various missions that we did. It wasn't the same thing every day, and it was an extremely capable, and still is an extremely capable platform. So gave you challenges for sure. Yeah.
It is a nice looking airplane. I've seen them a lot. I've seen them up close. I've got to work with them, but man, that's awesome. I've heard they're pretty fun to fly, pretty agile.
Yeah, with that airplane, I mean, it would be nice if I could say you did this in all airplanes. It certainly didn't feel like this when I was in the C5 for the little bit of time that I was.
Yeah.
And it was just a little bit of time. But with an F-16, and I'm sure a Raptor guy would tell you this, an F-35 guy, Hornet driver or an Eagle driver, they would tell you the same thing. You don't really strap into it, you strap it on, right? And the flying becomes kind of a second nature deal to you. You're employing the weapon system, so it becomes really a sense of freedom when you're flying it. It really does. It's a wonderful experience.
Heck yeah. So other than do you have you flown on the civilian side? Is that something that
I've flown some civilian airplanes. I had the opportunity to go fly for the airlines back in the early 90s.
okay,
And I had to make kind of a career decision at that point, whether or not I wanted to continue. There's a story there too, Jack. There's stories with every, we can dive into it pretty deep. But I had been a first assignment instructor pilot. You go through undergraduate pilot training to fly the T-37, and then you go and fly the T-38. And they kind of, in my time, they racked and stacked you such that they said, okay, you could be a fighter guy, you could be a heavy guy, or you might come back as an instructor.
right.
And the guys that came back as an instructor were called FAPEs, First
Mhm.
Assignment Instructor Pilot. And so I was a FAPE. And I did my time in the T-37. We called it the Tweet. And again, a ton of experiences to share in that realm that are kind of fun and interesting too. And the jet had its own attractions to it. But after that time, I was supposed to go to a major weapons system. General McPeak was the chief of staff at the time, and he said, no more fighters for FAPES. And it kind of crushed my world because at that time, and don't let my buddies in the Viper community hear this, but I wanted a Strike Eagle. I wanted an F-15E. That's the
Right.
platform I wanted to fly. And eventually I did get to fly one. But that's what I wanted. And, the chief of staff of the Air Force is saying, sorry, buddy, you can't have that. You cannot go to a fighter.
Right.
So I went out and looked for opportunities within the Air Force.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was the high time spin guy in Air Education and Training Command. That's now just ATC, but then it was AETC.
Yeah.
And one of my jobs as a Stanival flight examiner was to train the instructors what students may or may not do in terms of mistakes while you're spinning the airplane. So an airplane that's spinning, if you don't know, Jack, is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
It's not flying anymore. A lot of people would call it, they would say it's out of control.
Right.
Because it is out of control. You can gain control of it, which is exactly what I was teaching guys to do. But I had more time doing that than anybody in ATC at the time.
Yeah.
And so the test pilot school out at Edwards, they were looking for somebody to come out to Edwards and take over one of their programs. And that facet of my background was really attractive to them.
Hmm.
So I went out there and interviewed, and I was fortunate enough, I would say blessed enough, to be chosen to go do that job. And that's what got me that long list of platforms that you talked about.
Yeah.
And I would have to go into more of the story for you to understand why. But
Gotcha. Well, maybe we'll hit it here in a little bit, but
yeah.
that's pretty awesome. So, kind of off of what you're saying, being a FAPE, is that something that guys just didn't want to do? I mean, coming
Uh,
out, was that looked down
well,
on?
well, actually, at the time, look, it for me. I was being put exactly in the right place for what I needed, right? I was an
Right.
enlisted guy with 3 years, 9 months, and 12 days as an enlisted guy before I had the opportunity to go to officer training school, which is like the front end story of my stepping into the service.
Mhm.
Um, but when I graduated from pilot training, I was really hoping for a fighter.
Yeah.
But when they gave me the T-37 and I started flying it, I quickly fell in love with the job. And it turned out it fit my personality really, really well. One of the things to this day that I appreciate the most, that I just love the most, is watching other people become more than they think they could. That's that's what I love doing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's flying jets or some other thing that I like to do that I have the opportunity to teach them on. But that's what I like to do. And that really fit well for me. And it opened up some doors on the other end. And it gave me the time to mature as a pilot. I was at a base where the weather was very bad all
Hmm.
the time. And so you got to fly in a lot of bad weather, and the students were often at a loss for exactly what to do. It wasn't just the simple follow the grid lines like you might find in Texas or Arizona or something like that. It was a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
And that was just, it was perfect for maturing me as an aviator and letting me stay alive through the things that I ended up doing later that became much more challenging.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice. Okay. All right. So switching gears real quick before we get back into that stuff, because it's very interesting hearing these stories, especially, flying something I took up right before I retired. So just hearing these stories, going TDY out to Nellis, to do things out there, I'd sit out and just watch these planes fly over. I'm like, man, I made the wrong choice. Um, but so real quick, of all the places you've ever been, where you live now to, any business trips you've gone on or any other places you've been stationed at, what's the one place that you will go out of your way to get a burger at?
Get a burger at.
Yeah.
The grill that my wife is cooking on, no matter where we're at.
All right. All
Yeah.
right.
I mean, it's the truth. I mean, every base, we don't, my family, I don't hear any of them say there was a place we didn't like. We
Mhm.
liked and we've been to a lot of places. This was our 19th home before we retired. This was our 19th assignment. So we'd been around quite a bit. But we loved every place we went. And I think it's because we dove in, and this stability that my family brought to me. That's why I say my wife's burger on whatever grill
Yeah.
um, that she's using is because that was a piece of strength and stability, and it tastes good, tastes great. But that was, I think that's why I say that, because I definitely wouldn't pick a fast food joint. I hate fast food,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, that would be it. Now there are some crazy breakfasts at
Okay.
a place called Sills, and it's near Salt Lake City. It's Layton, Utah, by
Okay.
Hill Air Force Base.
Yeah.
Those folks have some crazy good breakfasts that
That's
are unique. Yeah,
yes. Yeah, that's the spot right there. Is breakfast.
yeah,
Yeah. Sills. I'm gonna write that down and
yeah.
put that
Sills.
out.
Yep.
Utah. Okay. And then one last thing. So, assuming, yeah, I mean, knowing that I've been deployed and gone on business trips all the time and just being away from the family, a lot of movie watching. So, is there a movie that you could turn on as you're like going to sleep or doing whatever you need to do that just kind of reminds you of home, but you don't really have to like, look up to kind of see what's going on just because it's like it just reminds you of being around everybody.
Oh wow, a movie that reminds me of home. You're
Yeah.
making me think on my feet. I
Yeah.
mean, I know what my favorite movie is, but one that makes me think of home. Ah, what what is the name of the one with the kids? The little boy who's left at home at Christmas. Home
Oh,
Alone.
Home Alone.
Home Alone.
Okay.
Home Alone. Yeah. We had a blast. As kids and with my kids, we had a lot of fun around the house.
Yeah.
And then my daughter and now my son with his kids have started some traditions that, you know, that make a bit of mischief, and we have a really good time. So,
I
yeah,
like
I
it.
guess, yeah, that's a good one.
It's a great movie. It's a classic. It's
Yeah,
definitely
it's
a
classic.
classic.
It's a classic. Yep.
Watch it well all year long.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, good. Okay, so that's the last of really getting you to think on your feet real fast. But so I'm gonna leave the floor open to you, pick, and let you kind of introduce yourself, where you're from, kind of where you were raised, and what got you in the military.
Okay, sure. So I guess I'll start kind of in the beginning. I was raised kind of in the Rust Belt of the United States in a small town. It's much smaller now. But you were either a farmer or a factory worker in that town. And I wouldn't say I was an excellent student. I was pretty good in sports. My sport is wrestling. That's what I really did okay at. I played football. I did track, but excuse me, that's the one that I really loved and still love today. But out of high school, there were some commitments I had to live up to out of high school that would not allow me to leave. And, it was really God's providence that left me there in my hometown. You graduated 18 years. I didn't get in the Air Force until I was 23 or 20, yeah, 23. And those 5 years were consumed by helping somebody that I loved a lot leave this planet. My father-in-law, he taught me a lot. He was a very important man to me.
Yeah.
And being there really was the right thing overall. And I had tried to get educated during that time. I was working in one of those factories. Like I said, you were a farmer or a factory worker, one of the two.
Right.
And I had to provide for my family, so I was working in the factory. My wife was working there too. And I tried to commute to the state university back and forth, but I worked 6 to 7 days a week, sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day. And that made it nearly impossible, to get an education.
Yeah.
So, somebody, I think it was one of the guys in the factory that I worked in, he was in the Air Force and he drove a piece of equipment called a Bagnall.
Mhm.
And anyway, he pulled his Bagnall. It's a great big piece of machinery, Jack. It can reach really high to a ceiling. And I'll never forget the visual of this. He pulled up next to me, and he lowered his boom really quick and it came down hard. And he went, "You need to go to the Air Force."
Well, Sam
And
wants you.
yeah, yeah. Uncle Sam, he didn't say Uncle Sam wanted me, but I think he was saying for my sake. I
Yeah.
really do. I think he was saying for my sake. And so, about 2 years into that 5 year gap from graduation to being inducted into the Air Force, I was challenged with that. So I tried to join. I went to the recruiter and I took the test, you know, and he came back and said, "Hey, man, we can give you some pretty good jobs based on whatever he was rating me on."
Right.
And he ran the numbers and made some calls, and it was like, "You have a pending lawsuit against you." And I went, "What?"
Yeah.
And it was this bogus hit and run that this guy that was intoxicated had kind of put out there.
Yeah.
And it was legally keeping me there. And about that same time, that's when my father-in-law got really sick.
Gotcha.
So it's very strange, but if you follow the dates out, he passed on Valentine's Day.
Hmm.
And within about 5 days after that, I got a call that that suit was dropped and that the Air Force wanted me. And
Wow.
so I was in the Air Force in March
Yeah.
and
Wow.
gone. So, don't question it. He's got a reason for what he's doing, right? But
Thanks.
that's how I got into the Air Force, and I came in as as an electronic technician on Titan II missiles and the missile procedure trainer. Um, Basic was a hoot. I loved it. It was fun. There were some interesting challenges there and lots of good friends that I made. But I showed up at my first base, which was Little Rock Air Force Base, after being at Chanute and out at Vandenberg, doing my tech school and things like that. It was a very long tech school
Yeah.
uh, overall. But when I showed up at Little Rock, I was doing I'll keep it as brief as I can, but I was uh, keeping watch on what was happening at that base. Little Rock Air Force Base at that
Yeah.
time had these Titan missiles, and they were way out in the field, different
Yeah.
field. Something catastrophic had happened right before I showed up at a site called Damascus. One of them had blown a 750-ton door off the top of the site with a missile with a nuclear warhead on top
Oh,
of it
geez.
into into a field, right? So
Yeah.
people were pretty tense about that, and everybody was trying to very much stick to the rules of the road for everything. but I kept seeing airplanes flying around, while I was there. And I had gotten proficient at my job. I had, pursued education a little bit, but not much up to that point in the front end. I wanted to get my 5 level.
Yeah.
That's what I was really fighting at. And that came expeditiously, I would say, to me. And because I'd been watching those planes, I had this little habit at that point. I only had one child, my daughter, and she was maybe 6, 7 years old, something like that. And the base operations, the way it was situated geographically, there was a little hill that I went to often, and I could watch the Herky birds, the C-130s, fly through the pattern and, do their final turn and come in and land and stuff. And my daughter would go with me periodically, right?
Yeah.
And so one day we're watching these guys, and the next thing we know, these two really cool, sleek looking airplanes that were white came in and landed. And my jaw dropped, right?
Yeah.
My jaw absolutely dropped. I loved it. And my daughter saw it. And this is kind of a story about out of the mouths of babes is really what this is about. So I looked at those guys, and they were climbing down the ladder, getting out of their jet, going to base ops to grab a burger and a shake. And my daughter asked me kind of the 5 whys. She said, "Daddy, why don't you do that?" I said, "I can't do that, honey. I'm not an officer." She said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, because you have to go to college, and I chose the route that I'm on." "Well,
Mm.
why can't you change it?" And I said, "Because I don't know how." And she said this. She said, "He does." And he pointed at the guy that had climbed down the ladder.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, I was humbled. I literally put her in the car, whoop, took her back, had my wife, I handed her off to my wife. I went
Yeah.
back to base ops. I said hello to the captain, who was eating his hamburger and a strawberry milkshake. And by the way, he was a great dude. He bought me a milkshake. I asked him, "How do I do this?"
Yeah.
He told me what I needed to do. And I went, okay. But the biological clock was ticking on me.
Right.
You have to get into pilot training by the time you're 27 years and 6 months old, or you were done, at least back then.
Yeah.
So what a wonderful thing. The guy told me what to do. I departed base ops, went to the education office, told the lady I needed to do it in that timeline, set me a plan. I'll be back tomorrow to see the plan. And from there, I just executed and took a wild shot that I might get accepted into OTS.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got into the aviation side of it.
Yeah.
I got lucky enough to get a pilot slot out of the whole deal.
Well, that's awesome. That's funny that your daughter's like, well, he does.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah,
Go ahead and
right.
get back in the car.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was like I said, it was really humbling. It was really humbling. So, yeah.
So here's a quick question for you. So when you joined, what was your plan? Was your plan to do like 4 years,
Yeah.
6 years, whatever, and then get out? Because I find a lot of times people are like, yeah, I didn't like I was gonna do 4 years, and I did 30, and you're like,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah, my plan was very specific, and I'm going to have to go back to the factory that I worked in as a kid. I saw a lot of guys in this factory. Safety wasn't what it is today, right?
Right.
O standards and things like that. And in this factory, we had a lot of heavy equipment. We had a lot of chemicals. We chopped up and ground and milled together a lot of those materials all at the same time. So there were some mechanisms that would thrust themselves into the material that you were using to make car mats. They made car accessories, but it needed to push really hard, right? And then you had to chop that stuff really hard. And I saw some guys get cut up and lose their hands, lose their arm. I almost lost my toes one day running this mill, and one of those bars didn't retract. It came down and it literally chopped through the top of my boot, and my toes got scraped up. The knuckles of my toes got scraped up,
Yeah.
but they had withdrawn, so I kept my toes.
Goodness
And
gracious.
yeah, so when they said, "Hey, you can be an electronics technician in the Air Force," I was like, I know what I'm going to do. I am going to get this. I'm going to go to the community college of the Air Force. I'm going to get a degree in electronics, solid state kind of stuff. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to fix their systems because, just a couple micro switches would have solved the problems.
Right,
And
right.
so that was my thought when I went into it, but it changed because I fell in, I didn't say this up front, but I was beginning to fall in love with the Air Force mission when I was in Titans, when I was enlisted, right?
Right.
I believed in, by the time I had made this decision to go get education in the Air Force, I was fully bought in. I was bleeding blue like you read about,
Yeah.
right? So I wanted to be, I wanted to do something and I would have probably been just happy as a lark doing what I was doing, but my personality of what I liked as a child, I like to go fast. I still race car. I race cars today. I raced
Yeah.
motorcycles. I enjoyed that type of thing. And when I saw airplanes, I went, oh man, Grandpa, you're right. Because my grandfather said, you got to find something that matches what you love. And that was it. And, I never looked back after that moment.
Nice. Well, perfect. Well, hey, before we get into all the flying and everything, post the academy, I'd like to take a quick break, and then
Yep.
when we get back, we'll jump into OTS or OCS, and then we'll continue on and we'll talk through that. So, all right, man. We'll see you in a couple minutes.
Roger that. See you.
Okay. See ya. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. I couldn't do this without you. To help show support, please hit the like button, subscribe to the show, and leave a comment. Your support and your feedback mean the world to me. Thanks again for listening. All right. Well, welcome back. Hopefully the break was good for you. And
Yep.
good. All right. So let's kind of pick up where we left off. So you were at Little Rock Air Force Base. Kind of was watching the fighters and everything kind of fly around. Your daughter helped make a decision for you, and you went in. Uh, you did all the schooling that you needed to do. You got a ticket to OTS, Officer Training School.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah. Yeah. My that exceeded any expectation of success that I would have ever envisioned. At the moment that they said I had been selected, the numbers were pretty daunting in terms of how many enlisted guys got picked up
Yeah.
for that. So 300 had applied, and three of us got selected. Um, there were just a few aviation slots across all the people that came in,
Yeah.
and um, I was fortunate to get one of three slots that were given. So went down to San Antonio again to the Medina complex to go through officer training. Made some good friends, going through that experience as an officer. But I have to tell you, it was a different thing for me this time, and it began a trend. Overall, I was over the rest of my career, just because I was so senior to most people.
Yeah.
Most people, if you remember the front end of the story, I'm 5 years waiting to get in. So I showed up there. I'm, very used to what's going on in the service. Some people coming from ROTC or just from wherever, some profession that allowed them to go through OTS. Doctors did this sometimes too. They had an even more abbreviated course, but I was the SRO, the senior ranking guy, right?
Yeah.
And so I got put in roles of authority kind of right off the bat.
Mhm.
as I showed up there, and it was a lot of fun for me, but I realized how little I knew about it, and I kept trying to learn about it, you know,
Right.
um, through that experience. Uh, but I left there with that aviation slot I was telling you about and went out to start undergraduate pilot training, which is about a year long in total
Yeah.
before I ended up doing the test pilot school or the FAPE thing. Sorry, the FAPE
Gotcha.
thing. Yeah. So,
So, so do does the Air Force do they let you guys go fly like Cessnas or anything prior to like strapping on a little bigger of an aircraft?
well, I didn't give the full story on the education part that the
Yeah.
guy, remember the guy with the milkshake at base ops?
Yeah.
So he told me what I needed to do, but he gave me a lot of good detail too.
Right.
And I had never flown an airplane.
Yeah.
He said, if you could get an engineering degree, that would be great. So I went after an engineering degree.
Wow.
If you, if you have a pilot's license, that'll put a feather in your cap towards selection. And so, I set about to do that, and it was really wonderful because when I was enlisted, I worked midnight shift,
Mhm.
and what it did was allowed me to go to school during the day and on the weekends, and work basically at night. But I became kind of an insomniac, and one of the things that I needed to do during that period of time, uh, it was about 2 years and maybe 4 months, 5 months, 2 years, 5 months, something like that. That I rammed all this through.
Yeah.
Um, I had to get a pilot's license.
Right.
And so I started training on I called it a trauma hawk.
Yeah.
Piper had an airplane called a tomahawk.
Uh-huh.
I called it the trauma hawk in retrospect. But that's what I learned to fly on, little single engine, job. And I got my pilot's license there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had the opportunity to fly some little guys too, quite a few actually, besides that one.
Yeah.
But
So that's all right. So just kind of put things into perspective. So if I were to give that story today, right, I would tell
yeah,
you like I joined, 6 months ago, and I need to go. I'm trying to get my education done so that I can go be a pilot or be an officer.
yeah.
Um, that would make like in today's society, in today's world, it's so easy because I can sit here in my office once the kids go to bed, or if I'm a single guy, I work all day, hit the gym, do whatever I do, and then just pop open my laptop, do my courses, and be done. But I'm assuming that when you were doing this, I mean, the internet wasn't really a
Oh
thing.
no, 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 no. There was none of that. No,
Yeah.
no. You had, we had professors fly in from Southern Illinois University to Little Rock Air Force Base,
Yeah.
and you were physically in a class with other students, and you went through every course that way, and the professors grilled you that way. And on the weekends, they were there for 8 full hours at a time. So
Jeez.
it was a constant. That's what I meant by being an insomniac.
Yeah.
uh, it was a constant cadence of education. There was no summer break. There was none of that. But
Yeah.
there was also no option. There was no failure option.
Right.
There was no failure option whatsoever, because I had one shot at this, and I needed to get it right. So
Yeah.
um, it was just keep driving.
And
Yeah.
then on top of it, uh, from personal experience, going to get a private pilot's license, like that's not an easy feat in itself either. So on top of doing engineering stuff, working, now you're trying to get a pilot's license, civilian pilot's license on top of that.
Yeah, yeah. This it was kind of the flying part always came to
Easy.
me.
Yeah.
That part, yeah, that just came to me. Um, the academics on top of the other academics
Yeah.
became the slog, right?
Yeah.
And so when it came time to test, I really had to focus on whatever the curriculum was
Right.
that was necessary at that moment, and just really dive into it. But, I think it helped me in the end. I think it helped me become a better instructor for other people.
Yeah.
Remember, I told you, that's what I love. I love people. I love seeing people become more than they thought they could be.
Right.
It's just an awesome thing. And that experience, along with a whole bunch of other experiences, um, that's what led me, I think, to it.
That's awesome. That's a lot of
Yeah.
hard work.
Well, it is, but I had the opportunity to do that work. There
Yeah.
are a whole bunch of people that never had that opportunity to even do that work. So I feel like I used the word blessed. I feel that I was blessed to even have that opportunity, period. Because look, my hometown, it was not like that.
Right.
It was hard. It very hard place to raise a family, and have longevity expected kind of in your life. That wasn't a lot of
Yeah.
people didn't really get that.
Plus your wife on top of it and having a kid, man, they're very understanding and must have been very strong women to put up with that.
Yes, I say this all the time. My wife doesn't need me. Um, right? She wants me in her life, but she doesn't need me. But that's exactly the kind of uh, partner in life that I needed.
Right.
Right? She was strong. I when I met her, when I was dating her. So I
Yeah.
remember I told you I raced motorcycles, right?
Yeah.
So her brother and I rode motorcycles around all the time, dirt bikes. He
Right.
had he rode Yamahas, and I rode Suzuki's. But we were raging around all the time on motorcycles. And one day we're down by her mom's house and we're jumping over her driveway. She had a lower bottom that kind of climbed up a hill and then went over the driveway onto another hill that had pine trees on either side. And we're wah, jumping, wah, jumping. And it was beautiful. It was glorious. Well,
Yeah.
my wife had, not my wife at the time, but my wife to be,
Yeah.
she had a 225. And, she was like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And wah, up she goes. And she landed in that tree,
Oh,
in a great big pine tree, right? She got hung up in the pine tree. The reason I tell that story is it was that moment when I went, I'm marrying that girl.
yeah.
I am marrying that girl because she's strong enough and independent enough to try things that have a little bit of, anxiety and fear kind of in them, but willing to face it.
Yeah.
And, she's carried that through all the hardships, some that I've caused, some that just came to us, but she's been able to carry that strength through our whole life. So,
Nice. That's
yeah,
good.
yeah,
That's good. Okay, so now you make it into pilot training,
yeah.
and you start flying. Um, I don't, where do you go from there? So, how did that go? Actually, how did pilot training go? Because I've heard it could be pretty arduous.
Well, so back when I did it, the washout rate was pretty brutal.
Right.
It was quite brutal, and it was taxing, but it academically it was not more taxing than what I had just been through.
Yeah.
And so I think I was, all the way through kind of, I was I was being prepared a little bit for what I was going to face.
Yeah.
You had to keep your composure. You had to understand what the procedures were. You had to know your airplane. You had to know the rules. And you had to go prove that you knew that. And it was a physical sport, right? I mean, look, flying airplanes that can turn and burn, it's a physical sport. It's kind of like wrestling,
Mhm.
especially when you're in a fighter. When you're in a fighter, it's very much like wrestling in a three-dimensional world with a guy who's got, something similar to you as a tool to work against you.
Yeah.
But regardless, I saw a lot of friends in undergraduate pilot training in the front end that just didn't make it.
Yeah.
Those that progressed with me to T-38s, most of us almost made it out of that. I think we lost 3 guys in T-38s, but there was only about 60%, maybe a little less, of our class that was there you know, that finished, you know, in the start.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, but it was it was wonderful. There's a lot of study in simulators. I mean, yeah, it really gets the habit patterns ingrained in you.
Yeah.
They kind of start you up front with academics and then move you into simulators.
Yeah.
You have to prove that you can conduct the emergency procedures the way they're supposed to be. So they almost make it rote memory so that when you see something, you know what to do. Um, they they teach you. I mean, they do. They teach you. They give you techniques how
Yeah.
to be calm in the midst of that. So you hear a lot of guys say, "Just wind the clock." The first thing you do when bad things go on is you just wind the clock, and
Gotcha.
that just means breathe. Think about it before you take an irreversible action. That's all it means.
Yeah.
Um, you'd be surprised at um, how many people can't separate the two. You know, the need, the flight or fight
Yeah.
response versus otherwise. So, yeah,
Yeah. I would think, especially in a fast mover, one wrong move. I mean, you're moving so fast. I think, I mean, I can only put it together flying a Cherokee, a Piper Cherokee.
yeah,
You're moving 80 knots, and you get a stall or whatever. I'm moving 80 knots. You're moving like 280, 380 knots. And it's like you don't take that split second to kind of figure out what you need to do next. That
yeah,
life or death.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I I have a story about that.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine. If he hears this, he'll be laughing. But his call sign Speed. Okay,
All right.
so Speed and I are flying F-16s, and it's a training mission. We are acting as Red Air, and
Mhm.
so we're flying F-16s against two four ships of F-16s that are down low, flying through the mountains, and we're supposed to attack them and pick them off as they're going towards the target area, right?
Right.
So I'm the flight lead, and I'm, basically telling him which one to target. It's called sorting. You got to
Okay.
sort out who's got what so that you don't interfere with one another. But the long story short was that got mixed up. That communication got mixed up. And you know how you were talking about moving 80 knots, moving 120 knots, whatever.
Yeah.
Back in the middle, in the tapes, when we reviewed these tapes, there was an immense amount of closure. It was like 600 knots of closure. Then we were flying almost on the same vector.
Right.
But what happened was we were both on the same guy. And I looked up and I squawked on the radio, and all I saw was intake of the F-16 out of the top of my canopy. That's all I saw.
Jeez.
And, at that moment, he pulled as well. And we passed within 20 feet of each other with 600 knots of
Holy
closure.
cow.
And it's kind of funny because, Speed would have to tell you if this is true or not, but this is how I remember it.
Yeah.
We were close. We got along very well and we talked a lot. And he was married and I had kids, and um, I lauded the experience of being a parent, being a father all the time.
Yeah.
And Speed he was toying with the idea. He and his wife were toying with the idea of having a child.
Right.
I swear, 9 months after that incident, they had a child. Yeah, I think it made the decision for him, you know,
Yeah.
uh, okay, yeah, I'd better just go ahead and do this before I don't have the opportunity to do this.
Exactly. That's funny. That's
Yeah,
good stuff.
yeah,
Um, yeah, sorting that would suck. You know, you're like, hey, I got lead. You take three back, and gets mixed up. You both shoot a missile at the same guy. You're like, dang, that's a wasted two missiles or
yeah,
one.
yeah, yeah. We would call them out in terms of where they were in the formation, eastern or western. Once you got everybody targeted to the
Yeah.
formation, you would then sort out the formation. If you had a group of four, you would just sort them out so that you put the missiles where they needed to be. Um, but but when you're maneuvering and you're replicating red air, there are, we call them cuffs. There are training restrictions on you to simulate, what the adversary that you're replicating may do.
Right.
And so that drives you into a weapons envelope that's really trying to replicate what they have.
Yeah.
And that that nuance, if you're both aimed at both, the same blue air guy,
Yeah.
can really run into a problem quite quickly. But
Well,
that's why there's a flight lead, and that's why there's a wingman, right? I mean,
right.
the flight lead shouldn't have to ever worry about that. The wingman is really in charge of deconfliction, visual deconfliction from his own formation.
Gotcha.
But once your fangs are out, you know what I mean by that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Once your fangs are out and you think you've got everything squared away, there are these flashes of time where you're autonomously operating, and you kind of need to.
Right.
It was just, like I said, a miscommunication.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So here's a question for the F-16. So you did a lot of air to air, and I don't know the time frame that this story was in, but did you guys work any close air support lines?
Oh gosh, yeah, all the time, all the time. Yep. We had ranges dedicated to it that we went to, and we did it in the AOR as well. But we were always working with guys on the ground. I will say I love working with the Army. I love working with the Marines, and I've got some stories about the Navy, but I enjoy working with them as well, right?
Right.
But for guys from your discipline, it was always a great experience to see how seriously they took their job, and their willingness to understand some of the risks that were on us. So they'd put us in a cast stack,
right,
and keep us deconflicted and wouldn't get us in each other's business, back to those midair potential kind of things. And they were professionals, and that's all we wanted. We wanted people who wanted to do their job as well as we wanted to do our job.
Right.
That's who we wanted to work with. And we got that out of guys who are running, cast lines for sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned the AOR. So did you have anything from those times? Any good kind of
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the honestly, probably one of the most interesting and well-known stories, and it was a formative experience for me and all the guys that were with me, not just from my squadron at the time, which I was in the 34th Fighter Squadron at the time that this occurred. We were known as the Rude Rams, but we were chopped off to the 4404th for Operation Southern Watch, and we're doing stuff down there. We, instead of doing the targeting, we were targeted while we were sleeping.
Oh.
And so that kind of set off a chain of events. It was Kobar Towers in 96.
Okay.
June 25th, 1996. And lost a lot of people there. That was, like I said, a formative time, I think, in everybody's mind. But it was very quick that we had a great squadron commander, and I won't use his name right out, but I'll use his call sign. JW is his call sign. And JW really did an amazing job leading the team and keeping our, as much as you can, keeping people engaged in the mission, the right thing for the right reasons. And we relocated like quick, right? And took as much stuff as we needed with us, and we went hunting. And it was just an awesome experience overall. So we were flying at night all the time looking for, that was a bomb. There was a great big bomb in a truck that pulled up next to Kobar Towers.
Right.
And the intel was that there was probably another one headed, maybe from Syria, maybe from Jordan, but possibly cutting across Iraq. And so we were searching for that.
Yeah.
had very specific stuff that we had to search for. So anyway, let's just say we did our job. We did our job very, very well. And
Yeah.
then we continued to do the Operation Southern Watch job after that had a lot of great experiences wrapped up in it, as well. So it was a wonderful time, but not without its challenges, for sure.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Mm.
Have you ever experienced anything in the F-16 while flying? I would say just like a non-training line, where like your Southern Watch that maybe you guys maybe have gotten painted by surface to air threats or
Oh yeah, yeah.
um,
Barlock Bob had us, although we kind of Barlock Bob. So here, I'll give you a funny one
yeah,
so this one's a harmless, funny one, but so we're on a night mission and we're flying out of the southern part of the AOR,
right,
and uh, at that time, going north of the 32, the 32nd parallel
hmm
was right out, right? You weren't supposed to go in there. And there was this I think it was an SA3, I'm pretty sure it was an SA3. But this guy that we called Barlock Bob, and he was always looking for, targets out there. So you knew he was going to be searching. You knew kind of where he was. You knew what his lethal range was. You knew what his acquisition range was. You had a pretty good idea. And so, we stiff armed it and we mission planned around it for the most part. But I think it was Deuce and I don't remember. A buddy of mine, my roommate during this deal, one of my roommates, after we deployed to the other location, call sign Deuce.
yeah,
And actually, I'll tell you about Deuce later, but there's a great story with Deuce, especially since you thought you were going to break your ankles and you ended up breaking your back.
yeah,
But anyway, we'll get to that. We're up flying, and my weapons officer had told all of us, that if you threat react and sound like a sissy, I'm paraphrasing, right? He
right,
used better, more descriptive words. Uh, uh, if you sound like a big sissy on the radio, you're going to get beat like a dog when you come back.
oh
So
yeah,
you're defending against something, it needs to be called out on the radio with calm. It needs to be accurate. It needs to be right, you
right,
know? And so we got really good at that. All the guys got really, like, it didn't matter whether you were getting lit up, right? You
right.
would do exactly what you're supposed to do, and you would sound like Tom Cruise on the radio, baby. I mean, it was really cool. So we're up there in the dark in the middle of this one night, and these Hornets are off the boat in the Gulf, and they were coming up to play too. And the next thing, we had offset to the east
Right.
because we were doing a little maneuvering, and they were coming up from the south
Yeah.
towards us. And when they heard us offset east, they offset east. And so when they offset east, they were now coming over this area that we were very familiar with out of Kuwait,
Right.
that had these water canals in them.
Yeah.
And it was a moonlit night. And next thing we know, these guys are defending for AAA.
Oh
So
no.
these Hornets are just defending because they have anti-aircraft artillery shooting at them, or at
Right.
least they think they do. And, we're looking down going, man, I don't think so. Intel didn't say anything about those guys. I mean, our Intel folks were amazing, by the
Right.
way. But anyway, we look down, and off the water in that canal is sparkling moon, right?
Yeah.
And so they were, I think it was a guy who didn't have a weapons officer like us
Right.
that said, you better sound good. I mean, that guy was scared to death. I don't know who he was. I never got to meet him. They went back to the ship and landed. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of experiences from that deployment. I mean, we pulled in one time underneath an AWACS thinking it was a tanker. because the stacks, the refueling stacks were so tight
Yeah.
that, there was an AWACS trying to get gas. And, well, it's the same basic airframe. It
Right.
just doesn't have a boom. And the weather was so gooey and it was dark and everything else, and we couldn't tell. So, yeah, there's 1,000 different things. There were balloons out of Kuwait that were up in the air. There were some bad guy aircraft
Hmm.
that launched and, came our direction. And that was always a great time. That was fun because you could stroke it up and, go run after them right up to the line. It was kind of like playing chicken a little bit because
Yeah.
they didn't want to have anything to do with us if we were targeting them. But anyway, those were some good times. I've got a picture drawn by one of my friends with a pencil, call sign Nordo, because he never really spoke. You couldn't shake that guy for anything.
Yeah.
But he's an artist like you dream about. And he drew this beautiful picture of an F-16 that's inverted, and it's got a couple of MiGs out off its nose, way, way, way out in the far distance. And
Yeah.
I think about that every time I look at that picture that he drew.
Man.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
pretty.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I bet you got tons, just tons and tons of stories. Um, but what would you say, real quick, as we take a break here in a couple minutes, but before we go on the break, what would you say what would you prefer? Would you prefer um, to run cast lines, or would you prefer that air to air? Um,
So what I liked was interdiction.
yep.
I liked strike. And part of that was because I needed to fight my way in unless I had the luxury of air to air support. And if I did, that was great.
Hmm.
I got to study the target area and, use the ordnance the way, look, dropping weapons back then wasn't just drive to a GPS coordinate, hit a launch acceptable region, and let the GPS take it. It wasn't like that. We
Right.
had little dumb bombs, general purpose munitions, we had laser guided bombs. Some of them were fairly complex, that the way you had to deliver them and keep the target illuminated. And you got some pretty good feedback. And in your targeting pod, you could do some BDA with it, so you didn't have to really all the time have people go do the BDA for you and things like that. You could bring it back, and you could, in your debrief, look at it, and you could tell what you did right, what you did wrong, what you need to do better next time, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Um, but I really, really enjoyed Strike. CAS, the component of CAS that's the most gratifying is that you're helping someone on the ground.
Yeah.
There was this sense of urgency with that you didn't. I mean, there is a sense of urgency with all of it,
Right.
but when blue forces there's a problem and you're there to help, or they're even down there where you might hurt them,
Right.
that changes the dynamic quite a bit, right? It's a very challenging it's a challenging mission, to say the least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I can imagine one side of the story, but the other side, you guys are up there, 15, 20,000 feet, spinning circles. We're yelling over the radio. It's night. You're looking down. You're like, man, it's funny to hear in stories. Guys are like, we're right next to the red roof, and you're like, there's like 15 red roofs.
Oh yeah. Oh
You
yeah.
know, and it's
Yeah.
until you actually get up there and look down, you're like, man, it's a totally different, you know, um, viewpoint. And even being on the ground, you're trying to describe just maybe an anchor point, to say like just a contact point. Like
Yeah.
like it is the only two-story structure out here, and he's like, I don't see it. And you're
I
like,
don't see
man,
it
how
this
do you
way.
not, so
Yeah.
it's definitely got to be a little bit more up there, just knowing, there's just a lot more probably going on. Flying, you got your wingman, you're looking down, you're probably doing some calc up there, trying to figure things out. So Hats off to you guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's gotten much better now because there's some automation to it
Yeah.
where you guys can send the ground personnel can send information so that you don't have errors transposing the data, right?
Yeah.
If you're handing off a 9 line, you don't end up with an error somewhere because honest man, we literally were writing it down on a kneeboard with a pencil and a in some cases a finger light, a green finger light pointing at the white card that we're writing on in the
Right.
middle of the night while we're flying,
Yeah.
right, with the same hand with another person, your wingman next to you.
Yeah.
And you have to get those coordinates and the information that you're giving in the 9 line into the jet.
Right.
So it's a very disciplined process that you have to go through in order to do that. But the thing that you said about perspective is absolutely right. I'll never forget. I had been through my time with the Rams, and I went to the Fiends in South Korea,
Hmm.
the 36th Fighter Squadron, and there's a DMZ up there. And I'll never forget the first time I went up there to do CAS because I'd been doing CAS for a while. I understood CAS
Yeah.
quite well. At least I felt like I did. And the guy says, "Call contact with the blue roof."
Yeah.
And I said exactly in my head what you said about the red roof, right?
Yeah.
Everything you looked at down there was a blue roof.
Yeah.
It was like, buddy, you're going to have to get bigger than that. I see two rivers, one flowing east-west, one flowing north-south. Which one are you closest to?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you're going to have to get me something bigger to grab onto and then walk it down from there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, perspective is everything, Jack. Absolutely.
It is. It is. Well, man, so let's get ready to take a quick break. Something I want to hit on when we get back. You mentioned earlier, God put you, left you in your hometown for a reason, and I kind of want to
Yeah,
start hitting. Excuse me. I kind of want to hit on that in your perspective, and maybe talk about the start of your walk with
sure.
Christ, because that is, you know, I don't know if I've said it on any podcast that I've done or anything like that, but I know I've spoken to people and I'm like, God has closed doors, for a reason. God does things for a reason. You might not like it right now, um, and it might not taste good, but it's definitely He's doing something for you, and it's for a reason, and it's His reason. So, I kind of want to get on that track
Okay.
once we get back from the
Sounds good.
break and
Yeah,
love to hear that story. So let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll jump into there.
sounds good. See
Okay,
you in a
brother.
few.
Okay. All right,
All
see
right. Bye.
you. Pick, welcome back from the break.
Thank you.
Yep. Glad you made it back. Decided to come back. It's not boring.
Sure.
So right before the break, I was talking about kind of what I want to get into now. Kind of like I guess backtrack and talk more about Christ and how He's affected your life, because I know you mentioned that He kept you in your hometown for for longer for certain reasons, and so I know you mentioned that, and I did want to get back to that. So yeah, is that about the time that you kind of found Christ, or was religion and being a Christian and being in church before that? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I'll have to walk the dog a little bit for you and go back in time a bit.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to go back to how I was raised. So my father was a preacher
Uh-huh.
and he was a school teacher, elementary school.
Gotcha.
My mother was an elementary school teacher as well. But they were both very involved in church, and they had all of us involved in church as well. And so when um, I think if you would have asked me when I was 18, I would have had the same answers that I have today,
Mhm.
but not at the depth that I have them and the depth that I hold them true. It's unshakable for me now.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it for me. But then um, I kind of uh, I was raised up in it,
Right.
and so when I um, when I left home, to marry my bride, when that time when, I was telling you, well, I think he kept me in my hometown to allow me to help, see my father-in-law out of this world, or at least let me hold that precious from the memories that I actually had.
Yeah.
Um, that really is back to that conversation we were having a moment ago about perspectives. I
Right.
was really looking through a lens of today, and I would say a lens at the point where my faith became unshakable. Not that I fully appreciated it for what it was at that time. I really don't think I did fully appreciate it at that time in that way. And I'll explain what I mean. So, as I matured as an adult, you kind of know the story now. I joined the Air Force and I'm seeing all these different things going on, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of different people from different places and from different faiths and from different understandings of life. And, a lot of times you'll hear people say they came to Christ on their knees.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Christ on my knees. And um, really, it was a combination of damage that I had done myself,
Mm-hmm.
and um, the question of the exposure to all those different faiths that I had um, said to me, man, I've got to be arrogant to think that just because I was raised in it, that has to be the way, right?
Right.
So I did what any, uh, you know, I'll call it academic. I'm a little bit of an academic in ways. I
Yeah.
don't mind studying and stuff. Um, I set about to study it, and so I started studying theology. I took classes from. You've probably heard of Liberty
Yep.
University, but so I started taking classes from Liberty, and started to really dig into my own faith. And uh, to keep this less than an hour explanation, because it probably is if I was to do it, uh, justice.
Yeah.
The reality of it is that I came to the conclusion that to disbelieve in something or to believe in something, they kind of go. You make decisions when you believe in something. You kind of choose to disbelieve in other things,
Right.
right? So I could not come to a intellectual, objective observation to disbelieve what I understood about God. And when I'm saying that, I mean to be saved for your eternal life, to be from your faith, a chosen faith
Mm-hmm.
in Jesus Christ. I could not disprove that. And I kept trying, trust me. I
Yeah.
kept kind of trying to find some, I'll call it softer position overall. And I couldn't do that. So in the end, I I completely went, okay, I willingly choose to put my trust for my eternal life in my faith in Jesus Christ. I know there's a Holy Spirit. It has moved me. I know there's a God. The Trinity is not a problem for me. And all those other choices, whether you want to talk about being agnostic, or you want to talk about being an atheist, or you want to talk about being a Buddhist, or you want to talk about being, whatever, pick your flavor.
Right.
There are there wasn't enough evidence. I could disprove all of them objectively.
Right.
And I couldn't with faith in Christ, right? And in my own experience of life, every time I had tried of my own power to do something, and this is going to go back to where this story started with
Right.
that perspective of him holding me there, giving me time for that. Um, you know, every time I've tried to do something of my own power, maybe it works, but every time he has, it's succeeded.
Right.
And to me, that was a lot of proof, and it just keeps proving itself out. The older I get, I'm fairly on in the years now,
Yeah.
right? And the older I get, the more consistent that truth becomes, that if I put it in his hands and I let him drive, it always succeeds. Sometimes I have to be patient, right? Sometimes I have to wait. It's not like I can just put my hands together, bow my head, and pray and say, God, do this for me. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But his providence is trustworthy, and he's, I believe, worthy of that faith. So that's kind of I got up off my knees at that point and went, okay, because you love me, I am worthy too.
Yeah.
And that was the only thing that was going to get me up off my knees.
Yeah.
So, and if somebody wants to critique my choice as a result of that, then that's fine with me. I'm at a place where that's okay.
Yeah.
There were people that helped me through that though. You had mentioned a Bible study when we were talking offline.
Yeah.
I went to Edwards Air Force Base, and there were some pilots there. They happened to be fighter pilots that were men of God, and they helped me, I think, understand. You don't kind of think about the fighter pilot community as a community of Christian guys.
Right.
You don't just think about them that way. But I'll tell you, there are a lot of guys of faith there. It's kind of like, who wants to go to war the least? Somebody who fights it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, hopefully that gives you some insight into.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that you mentioned about, having that mentor, I think it's important. And I think it's important for men, and kind of the whole premise of this podcast and why I started it is, guys who are out there in the military, whether they be fighter pilots, whether they be the ground guys, whether they be services, or first responders, or whoever.
Yeah.
I don't care. To see that, there are other men out there who do have strong faith, who do believe in Christ. So for one, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Some people may feel ashamed, to be a Christian, especially in today's society. But there's nothing to be ashamed of. And then there are other men you can reach out to for that mentorship. Because I've had a couple mentors in my life. My dad being one of them. But Tom Broadbent, the guy that when we were speaking offline, we both moved out to the same place together. He's one of them, and guy Barry Chaplin, Chaplain Barry Kemp. He was both those guys I did a podcast with, but he's a good friend of mine, and those two guys are the guys that I will call right away and like, hey man, I got this guy who's really thinking about becoming a Christian, and where I have this issue, how do you view this issue?
Yeah.
And so having those mentors, I think it's a great thing. It helps you along your journey.
Yeah, you mentioned the chaplain in your experience. The chaplain out at Edwards Air Force Base, he was an unconventional chaplain, and he has a son that I learned to be friends with, who's quite famous and other things like that. But his acceptance, the way that he shared life. I rode motorcycles still when I was out at Edwards. Everybody in the family had one, actually. Even my son, he rode around on a little 50cc bike. But
Nice.
The chaplain rode bikes too, and
Yeah.
boy was he good. And he wasn't your typical vision of a pastor, of a preacher.
Right.
And it was one of those things that got me to thinking, about the arrogance of it has to be the way it was when I was being raised as, this is what you must look like. This is the box you must operate in
Right.
order to be a person of sound faith, right? And it's not that my parents taught me that. They didn't. They did a wonderful job of giving all of their children a foundation, a Christian foundation. They
Right.
really did. But again, I can say that from this perspective after kind of going through all that myself, and then that chaplain really was helpful. I can't say. I wish I had two people that I could say, they were the foundational. But I think it was more like 10 or 15 different people
Yeah.
that influenced me heavily in making that decision, because I was really questioning it. I was searching for an easy out, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think I wanted to say everything's relative and anything I did wrong just doesn't matter because everything's relative.
Right.
And that was not what I found out to be true from my faith perspective.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that you studied, to try to I guess debunk it, if you will,
Yeah,
debunk Christianity. A famous guy, Lee Strobel, right? And I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember the book that he wrote. But he did that, right? His story was his wife came to Christ, and his daughter or son, I think it was his daughter, um, and he set out to debunk it, to show his wife, like, what are you doing? This is
yeah.
dumb, and it turned him to Christ, and it's
Yeah, C.S. Lewis is the guy that did that for me. C.S. Lewis, one of his books, a lot of his books are wonderful reading for Christian people,
yeah.
but Mere Christianity
Hmm.
is an amazing book. You have to take your time digesting it, but I mean, C.S. Lewis was one of those types as well. He was kind of trying to debunk it,
Right.
and he kept ramming himself into I can't. And he was a very well renowned academic in those times, and still today, his books, his writings, his teachings are completely applicable. Completely applicable. So
That's yeah.
yeah,
So you became a Christian. Pretty much, you grew up in it, but really got it later on in life.
yeah.
Um, and then joining the military, um, as a Christian man, as a follower of Christ. Do you like? Was that difficult for you? Were there times where you were able to get out and witness to guys? You
There
know,
were.
yeah,
Yeah, there were, but I did it in my way for sure. I definitely did it in my way. I mean, the first time, as you know, I was a FAPE up front, and then I went to the test pilot school,
right,
and you know, but the first official fighter squadron that I walked into, I ran into some different personalities that were strong personalities, and some of them weren't about faith,
right,
and they um, they would challenge me at times, to um, support my position and my views. And so uh, my my way of going about it is to show it through my actions. Not I'm not going to beat you with the Bible.
right,
I'm not going to beat you with the message of salvation. But what I will do is cause you to question, express what you are thinking and why you think it. And I love having dialogues with people about that, because inevitably it leads to options. It's
mm,
a it's a fault tree that you go down that really, you end up in a place where they have to either accept it or reject it. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this before, but with Jesus himself, the whole Lord, lunatic, or liar. So
okay,
which one is he to you? I mean, I don't think you can dispute that he existed. He
right,
existed, right?
yeah,
Right, and the the thought of believing in nothing. I don't know anybody who drives a car, walks on a bridge, goes scuba diving, flies in an airplane that believes in nothing.
Yeah.
You, 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 right?
Yeah.
You putting your life in the hands of something.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it the engineer? Is it the exquisite knowledge and ability of those engineers that built those things? What are you putting your faith in? You
Yeah.
have faith. All people have faith. They just, what are you putting that faith in?
No, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, all I was going to say is, I think you might have been scratching at employing as a, I mean, my job, oddly, one of my jobs when I was at Luke, when the guys would, that's the, where we taught guys how to fly the F-16. I was an
Okay.
instructor there as well.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I did was when the new guys would show up, I would go in and talk to them about what the job really was.
Yeah.
This isn't Top Gun. It's not, that's not what this is. Our job was, in the end, and I know this is going to sound crass, but was to make hair, teeth, and eyeballs out of our adversaries
Yeah.
for a reason. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to adjudicate when you come from a Christian perspective.
Right.
It's a very hard thing to adjudicate. I think there's some consistency in it. I know some of the things that I saw on what were our adversaries were evil. I
Mhm.
mean, it doesn't take our my youngest granddaughter can identify evil.
Mhm.
There's no doubt about it,
Yeah.
right? It's just it's very real, and it has to be dealt with. My son does he's an emergency room doctor, and he sees hard parts of life all the time that people don't want to see. And
Right.
I think our business is very much like that. It's a business that has to be, that people don't want to see, they don't want to acknowledge, but it is the way that our world, which God set up, is shaped and formed. And so, the way that I kind of got to it, I had habits.
Yeah.
Man, I stuck to my habits. Every time I flew, every sortie I flew in, I had a little Bible with a picture of my family. Inside that little Bible in my right G suit pocket.
Yeah.
I have that today, but I would bend over, I would stretch so that my back would be loose. And as I touched that Bible, I'd say the same prayer every time. And I would get in the jet and I left it there. I was in his hands. And I
Right.
saw glorious things when I was in the air, some, amazing, beautiful things from only he could create, you
Right.
know. They're beautiful things, not horrific things, but beautiful things. And they're that habit, that confidence, um, you know, it's going to carry me to the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned like the nothing thing. Um, there's this comedian, and I don't even think he's a Christian guy. Honestly, I don't know how he got on this topic for one of his shows, but he was talking about the difference between people who believe in Jesus, believe in God, and the people that believe in nothing. And it was one of his like lines, and he's like, and he was just good. He's like, "What? You got nothing plus nothing. What do you have? You have nothing."
And
And it's like, coming from a guy who's probably, he's just, getting the audience, but I'm like, man, this dude makes perfect sense.
yeah, yeah,
Whether he believes either side, but what his argument was, what comes out of nothing? Nothing. So
yeah,
tell me
yeah.
how this was made.
Well, I
Um,
think, you said something earlier. I don't think, you said people don't need to be ashamed to be Christian.
right.
In, I think you said, especially in today's world. And I'm stealing a line from my wife because I respect it and I believe it to be right.
Yeah.
But she's always said this, and I think it holds true to Christians in the way that it's a helpful way to express yourself to someone who may have different views than you,
Hmm.
right? Say what you mean. Mean what you say, but don't say it mean.
Okay. Say what you
What you
mean.
mean? Mean what
Mean
you
what you
say,
say, but don't say
but
it
don't
mean.
say it mean.
I like it.
Right? Because I mean, really, Christ did when he got upset, his normal expression to teach and bring people in was not one. I mean, come on. He could have approached this very differently, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
And yeah, so you'll never get people to interact with you and express what they're really thinking if you don't get that last part right. They'll
Yeah.
just they'll block you out. So yeah.
Yes, that is true. That's very true. Um, man. Yeah. So did you ever run into, did anybody, as you progress through the ranks becoming like a squadron ops officer or, um, maybe an XO or, I mean, or a commander, did anybody ever come to you knowing that you were a Christian man to get some advice?
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, yes. Yeah, sure did.
That's
Yeah.
good. That says a lot. It says a lot for you. One as a Christian, number two as just like a normal guy, right? In that hierarchy of rank, like I feel comfortable enough to go to this guy like and ask him some questions about faith, which is good because a lot of times you look at people and you're like, man, you look at commanders or chiefs or E9s, whatever the case, and you're like, man, I just don't know if I should talk to this guy. He comes off kind of you know whatever. So that's something for you, and hopefully
Yeah,
that went well.
it did. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about um, how you present yourself, but you have to be genuine. People can see, um, they can see a facade,
Right.
right? If you aren't genuinely wanting to be helpful to their cause, they they don't approach you. And I'm sure there are days that you know, I'm not the most approachable guy. I'm sure there are days like that,
Yeah.
but I try for it not to be that way. I believe kindness is a quality that is way, way underrated.
Yeah.
I mean, kindness is critical to human interaction, being earnest and honest. Because nobody really wants to hug a porcupine, man.
True.
It
Yeah.
just doesn't happen. So
No. Yeah. Well, perfect. Okay, cool. Well, hey, let's take another break real quick. And then when we get back, we'll start closing it up.
sounds good.
Maybe tell a couple of funny stories, and then I'm gonna steal a line from a podcast that I used to listen to, Sporties. I think it was Sporties or podcast. I can't remember, but it was a flying podcast, and he always
Oh,
asked the
okay.
same question at the very end of each of his podcasts. So I'm going to steal it. Don't know if it's copyrighted. I'll ask permission later.
Okay. Sounds good.
All
See you.
right, man.
All right.
Okay, we'll see you at the break.
All right.
All right. Okay. All right, Pick. Welcome back from the break. When we left off, we were talking about kind of our your walk with Christ and how that went through the military and how you became a Christian and started that walk. So great stuff, man. Love hearing stories about guys in their faith and how that's worked out for them and how God is good and whether you like it or not, he's doing his plan for you.
Yeah.
Um, always I heard a funny joke is like if you want to make God laugh, um, tell him your plan.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah. So to kind of wrap this up, before we end this podcast tonight, it's getting pretty late. Just wanted to know if you had any stories, kind of, something funny, maybe real, I don't, anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll share one, um, and I'll give you the moral of the story right up front. The moral of the
Okay.
story right up front is, um, it's not all about you, even if you think it is.
Okay.
So, I had about 2 years at Edwards Air Force Base, flying out of the test pilot school.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing time there. All the different exposures I got to have, working with some really true professionals, some guys who were pieces of history. And they treated me right at Edwards when I left, because I went there as a first assignment instructor pilot, and I didn't have much of a chance of getting into a fighter.
Yeah.
And according to the chief of staff, I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to get one.
Yeah.
But the guys at Edwards decided to fight for me, and they got me an F-16. And I knew that, and it was time for me to fly my last flight at Edwards. And so I was pretty proud of myself. I was pretty full of myself. And I went up on my Finney flight, and that day I was flying a T-38 is what I was flying. It's a white airplane. It's fast. It has the highest roll rate today of any aircraft ever in the Air Force inventory. It can do 720 degrees per second.
Whew.
I mean, it can roll, right?
Yeah.
But so I went out and I did the mission. It was a lot of fun, the things that I did. But on a Finney flight, normally you have the family there, and you have the squadron there, and they're going to douse you with water, and kind of where they're at. And so at Edwards, you had this luxury of a thing called a tower flyby, that it was really a pedostatic kind of test that we did, but you could fly between 50 and 75 feet right off the dry lake bed at the speed of heat, man, like 500 knots, and as fast as that puppy would go. And you could hold it there, and the test pilot school was about 3/4 of the way down the actual runway, maybe call it halfway down the actual runway on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
And so I was flying, down that tower flyby line, just feeling my oats, and my wife and my kids are standing out the back door of the test pilot school, and it was right there between these two hangars, and I knew exactly where they were all going to be, And so right when I get there, I pull up as hard as I can, and I stroke the blower, and I start rolling that airplane all the way up until it ran out of airspeed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I come back down and I land, and I taxi back in, and I get hosed down, and it was wonderful, and I walk up to my wife and give her a great big hug, and I'm all wet, and I said, "What did you think?" And she said, "You got really wet." And I was like, no, I mean, what did you think? About what? About what? I said, about the flyby, about, the plane going up. Oh, I didn't see it. And I think she was talking to one of the wives or something, but it was hilarious because, it wasn't all about me.
Yeah.
A lot more going on there. And it's funny how you can fill your own mind with your own goodness if you're not careful. So
Yeah.
it was kind of funny.
Yeah. No, I didn't see it. Can you do it again? Like,
No, I can't do it again. That was actually called my Finney flight. I can't do it again. But I mean, there's very few places you'd be able to do either of those things. Fly so fast at 50 to 75 feet, or stroke the blower and go straight up, unless you're doing an air show or something.
Right.
Rolling the airplane. So but that's one.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff, man. I'm sure most of us have been there before. We do something really cool. We're like, "Oh, did you see that?" And like, what? Your wife, like, what? Like, oh man, never ever happen again. I guarantee it, in a million times.
Yep.
So one thing that I was thinking about when you're just talking about that story was so call sign. So your call sign's Picard, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not your name. You're Tim. And being around the military, around the Air Force particularly, and around a lot of pilots, you guys always go by call signs. And that's one of the things. It's like, like say I had a commander would email, and then he would put his call sign at the end. and you're like, well, I probably shouldn't call you that, because you're Colonel so and so, whatever. But can you explain this call signs, and the stories behind them, or if you
Well,
have a funny story?
yeah, I mean, I'll give you a funny story
Okay.
that isn't so funny, but it gives you an idea of where call signs come from.
Okay.
Way there, there are rules of engagement relative to call signs that stick and call signs that don't. Um, but I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a scratchy throat after all this talking. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
No
sorry
worries.
about that. But um, the call signs, they they tend to come from you doing something that you wouldn't necessarily be proud of necessarily,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, Maverick. God, that's pretty cool call sign. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
Another thing about a call sign is you're really not supposed to like it. So if when they name you, you show this, oh, it's wonderful, I like that call sign, they're probably not going to give it to you. And who are the they? They're the more senior guys in the squadron that are doing the naming. So there are rules of engagement kind of to the call sign, and each squadron has little nuances around that that kind of attach to their own squadron history on
Right.
how they go through the presentation of the namage,
Yeah.
the new name, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of a good friend of mine who has had two call signs,
Okay.
and some of us know him by both call signs, and I'll tell you how both call signs came to be, and it'll kind of explain this, right?
Okay.
So there he was. He's in the final turn at Luke Air Force Base, minding his own business, coming down final. And the next thing he knows, another F-16 from behind and above him cuts off the back three-quarters of his airplane just behind the ejection seat.
Oh, geez.
The airplane, the cockpit,
Yeah.
flops forward and is now pointed at the ground. He punches out. He gets one swing in the chute, lands on the runway,
Yeah.
breaks both ankles.
Oh, goodness.
But where's the airplane that was doing 130, 140 knots? It's behind him, headed for the ground, in
Yeah.
fireball. So
Yeah.
what do? You run until you feel stupid, but he's got broken ankles. Well, he ran anyway. His
Yeah.
call sign was roadkill. His call sign was roadkill as a result of that.
Yeah.
So roadkill deploys with us to the desert, and he's on takeoff. He's on the departure end of this runway. I think he was about 11 miles out or so. He's got smoke in the cockpit, and he's got visible indications of fire. It's a single engine airplane, F-16, and there's only one choice.
Right.
He punches out,
Yeah.
right? He floats down from a very comfortable altitude of a few thousand feet as compared to the previous ejection. He
Yeah.
lands in the rock and sand there, but he finds his way back, goes to the hospital, and he wasn't seriously hurt.
Yeah.
His second call sign was Deuce. So what Deuce has said, if he ever turns into try anything like trifecta or tripod or try meaning three in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form, he's done.
Yeah.
Well, Deuce is still flying today. He's in his 50s, and he hasn't had the third one being the charm yet. But that gives you
Man,
an idea of how you earn your call sign.
I like it. I like it because there's some pretty crazy call signs out there.
There are. There really
So
are. Yeah.
Lord knows what they mean, and you can't
Very
really
true.
ask.
Yeah, no, you really can't. And you won't always get the true story either.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
And there's reason there too. So
Yeah. Well, perfect. Well, before we wrap this up, I've really enjoyed this, and I feel that we could probably do another podcast later on down the road, and we can just go through the history of you flying. I mean, I think each part of this, your Christianity, your walk with Christ, your pilotage, all this stuff, just raising kids and grandkids, man. I think we could do probably a 3-hour podcast on each. So I do appreciate you taking the time out tonight to come on and give your story and let other guys hear this, other people listen to it, and hopefully it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Of the things you mentioned, what I will say, in case we don't get to do that, of the things you mentioned there, absolutely the most rewarding is the raising of children and grandchildren. Yeah. It really is. So if there's anybody out there that's listening and you're questioning whether you should try, you should. Yeah. It's a gift that you will never, ever forget.
True. And hug your kids and carry them, because you don't know when the last time is.
And be kind to them always.
Exactly. Be kind. So, all right. Well, Picard, I appreciate you coming on, man. So I'm going to leave you with this question. Again, like I said, I'm stealing this from a podcast that I heard it on. So hopefully, I doubt they'll hear this, but if they do, I'm sorry. So if you could take one last flight in any airplane going anywhere, what would it be and where would you go?
I think it would be an F-16, and I would simulate, I would do the same thing I did at Hill Air Force Base one night when I was flying. We had dropped our bombs. We were light. We still had 2 bags of gas. It was a beautiful, crystal clear night. I was flying with Purple, a friend. That's his call sign, Purple. And anyway, the moon was really bright, and I stroked it up, stroked the blower, pointed my nose at the moon, and I was just climbing directly towards the moon. And if I could take a flight anywhere that I could go, I would continue that to heaven.
Love it. That's amazing.
That's what I would do.
Nice. Good answer.
So.
Well, perfect. Yep. Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks again for coming on. Hopefully we get to do this again. And yeah, man, I hope you have a great weekend and a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you and yours as well. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. All right. See you.